We're breaking down Matt Milano's pay cut and where the Bills roster is lean and what positions could use some additional investments today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I am your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Well, folks, welcome in. We've got some stuff to break down today. I want to start with Matt Milano and him taking a pay cut, and we'll talk about all the implications of that. And then later on, I want to talk about where the Bills roster is at in terms of numbers at each position. You know, the Bills have the opportunity to have a 90-man roster entering training camp, and they have 66 players currently on the roster. And so as we compare where the numbers typically are with the 90-man roster, I think we can come up with some good ideas for where the 24 players that are going to be added to this roster will come. But I do want to start with this Matt Milano news. He took a pay cut, and suddenly his contract and his future in Buffalo is very different than it was prior to this reworked deal. So in 2025, Matt Milano was set to count $15.8 million against the Bills' salary cap. Well, he agreed to a pay cut, which reduces that amount by $3.6 million. And of course, that means the Bills created $3.6 million in 2025 cap space because Matt Milano took a pay cut. Now, he took a pay cut, but he's also able to make all of it back through incentives. And those incentives are related to playing time, sacks, and interceptions. Now, I don't have the information for you in terms of what he has to accomplish in terms of playing time, sacks, and interceptions. We'll get that at some point, but conceptually, that's how he can make it back by reaching those incentives. It's very similar to what the Bills did last year with Von Miller. And he took a pay cut, but also had the opportunity to make it back through incentives, and he did make some of that back. Now, this deal also includes it voiding after the season. So 2026 and any future years that were on the deal are voided. So Milano is now an expiring contract after the season. And of course, that means he's set to become a free agent. And that's potentially a big benefit to Matt Milano. You could look at this rework deal and understand exactly what makes sense for the Bills. But why would Matt Milano be in this position? Well, he gets to hit free agency a year early. And that gives him all the incentive in the world to be healthy in 2025 and prove what he's still capable of doing in the NFL. Now, the Bills aren't totally off the hook as it relates to Matt Milano and committing cap space to him for 2026. If Milano is not on the roster, meaning the Bills do not re-sign him after the season, the Bills will have an $11 million dead cap hit for Milano in 2026. So there's definitely some give and take on both sides when it comes to this contract. Now, I would say that all indications are that it's shaping up for this to be Matt Milano's final year in Buffalo. He turns 31 in July, although I will point out that there's a recent history of linebackers in the NFL playing at a high level well into their 30s. I got 4 examples for you. Levante David with the Buccaneers. He just turned 35 in January, and he continues to play at an extremely high level for Tampa Bay. How about Bobby Wagner? He had an unbelievable season this past year for the Washington Commanders, and he turns 35 in June. Eric Kendricks had a nice season for Dallas this past season, and he just turned 33 years old. And I'll also call out Demario Davis, who I think has been one of the most underrated players in the league for a long time. Demario Davis with the Saints, he just turned 36 years old. And so those guys are considerably older than Matt Milano. And I don't think there's any reason to think that age in a vacuum precludes Matt Milano from playing at a high level this year or even for the next few years. So you can see why Matt Milano would want to take advantage of the opportunity to potentially hit the market earlier and, see if he can get one more big payday before he has to hang it up, or maybe even multiple. I mean, Levante David comes back to the Buccaneers seemingly every single season on a one-year contract, and he plays at a high level. And I think there's some good parallels between the type of player that Levante David is and what Matt Milano's been able to prove throughout his career. Now, David's been a lot more durable, and that matters quite a bit, but I just don't think that it's over for Matt Milano. And I think those players should be good case studies that suggest that he's got the opportunity to get it going again. Now, this does put Dorian Williams front and center to me. And Dorian Williams, third-round draft pick in 2023, and I've said repeatedly, and I'll say it again, that Dorian Williams was the most improved player on the team from 2023 to 2024. He went from a guy that I didn't believe was playable as a rookie. He certainly got some chances, and teams really exploited him being on the field, and I didn't think he was playable. And then in 2024, boy, did things slow down for him quite a bit, and you started to feel his impact and his presence, and he made a lot of plays. Now, was he perfect? No, but from not playable to, I kind of like Dorian Williams, right? That's a big jump. And I think that he's in position to really get a big opportunity here. Now, in 2025, this coming season, part of this deal is Milano guarantees a good amount of his contract for this season. Matt Milano's back in Buffalo with the intent to start next to Terrell Bernard. So Dorian Williams will be the third linebacker and be the backup, right? So if the Bills play three linebackers, I expect Dorian Williams to be on the field. And then, hopefully he can be the primary backup to both spots. And in all likelihood, based on recent years, injuries have been a thing for Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard. So it's probably only a matter of time before Dorian Williams has to play meaningful snaps for the Bills. But then in 2026, when Matt Milano is set to become a free agent, the door is wide open for Dorian Williams to step in as the running mate to Terrell Bernard. And he'd be getting that opportunity with 3 years of time on task in the scheme with a decent amount of playing time under his belt. And that's going to be the last year of his rookie deal. And so that's a big opportunity for Dorian Williams, whatever he can prove this year. And then in 2026, kind of the penciled in starter next to Terrell Bernard, where that could be a season that defines Dorian Williams as a guy that is going to be a potential long-term starter for this defense. He's still very young. And so I'm excited to see how he develops and progresses. I think so far it's been good through one off season, right? And now he's got another opportunity to take a jump. Of course, the Bills also have Joe Andreessen and Edefwan Ulofoshio. And Edefwan Ulofoshio, a day 3 draft pick last year that didn't get a chance to play much, but he's a player that I like quite a bit at Washington that I think has the traits that Buffalo really covets in a second-level defender. And, of course, Joe Andreessen, what an impressive rookie year where I truly believe that everything that he got, he earned. This wasn't some PR stunt. I think he clearly showed us that he belonged. He made an impact on special teams. Now, is he a guy that profiles as a Milano replacement, as a weak side backer? I think I have some questions about that. I think he's probably better suited to play on the inside, but he'll probably get an opportunity to showcase himself at both positions. And so for these young linebackers, it's a big year for them. And they're positioning themselves, of course, not only to make the team this coming year and define their roles this year, but there's a lot more opportunity potentially coming in 2026. Now, one other thing that I'd note here is I think this dynamic where, this is likely Milano's last year on the team. I think that does create some urgency for the Bills to get a rookie on this roster through a draft pick, potentially a middle round draft pick that can push Balin Spector off the roster, right? You have Spector as a guy that's been around, but he's just always injured. And I think that you want to have, as much developing young, meaningful talent as possible as you are set to really survey this linebacker position without Milano in future years. And I think getting Spector off the roster and another cost-controlled rookie player that'll be on the team for 4 seasons on a modest deal, I think that really helps you balance out your roster and making sure that your depth players, your kind of your bottom of the roster players aren't expensive, right? I think that's an important piece of where the Bills are at in their roster construction as they build this team with a lot of high-paid players on it. So there's the Matt Milano conversation, and it kind of goes right into what I have planned for the rest of this show, where I want to examine each position, talk about where the numbers currently are in terms of players at that position, and where they typically are for the Bills when they get to a 90-man roster. And that should give us some great clues as to where investments are going to come, whether that's through the draft, undrafted free agents, and any additional veterans. So, folks, we're getting into that next here. Be sure to stick with me. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. You can find the right talent. If you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who delivers incredible results. It's fast and easy. Posting a job is free and simple, and within a day, you'll have multiple qualified candidates to choose from. Plus, it's cost-effective. Instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps you find affordable top-tier freelancers to scale businesses efficiently. So visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com, to connect with top talent and grow your business today. Imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd and witnessing unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person, and getting tickets should not be stressful. That's where Game Time comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. Game Time Picks is the easiest way to find and buy tickets to live events. The curation makes it easier to find value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, and theater events. You get peace of mind. With seat views before you buy, no surprise fees, and the lowest price guarantee, you can book with total confidence. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's Locked On spelled out for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, folks, let's examine this roster. Let's focus in on the numbers at each position. Compare it to where the Bills' normal 90-man roster comes in, and that's going to give us some really good clues as to where draft picks are going to be invested, where UDFAs are going to be prioritized, and maybe even some additional veterans. I think roster ability is a big conversation right now. And the Bills have 10 draft picks, and you're wondering, how many can they realistically roster? What positions have the best path to a player being rostered? And so we're going to look at that right now and dive into it. And the Bills right now have 66 players on the roster, and they can go to camp with 90 players on the roster. So 24 additions are coming between now and when the Bills start training camp. And so what I want to do, like I said, is compare the numbers now to where the normal numbers typically are to find out where the investments are coming. Also, a big shout out to Chris Yonke. He helped me with this. He tracks a lot of information. So I reached out to him about where these Bills numbers typically fall on a 90-man roster, and he was able to help out. So shout out Chris Yonke, who's a very valued member of our subtext community, our Discord community as well. So let's do it. Let's start with quarterback, where the Bills actually are a little heavy at quarterback right now. They currently have 4 players on the roster: Josh Allen, Mitch Trubisky, Mike White, and Shane Buechele. The last 2 years, the Bills' 90-man roster had only 3 quarterbacks on it. And so you can see that This is a rare spot that is a little bit more robust. And I think what's going to happen here is Mike White and Mitch Trubisky are going to compete to be QB2, which I think is very healthy. I think you want that. And one of them's not going to make the team. And then Shane Buechele will probably be your QB3 on the practice squad. But for all the positions that we're going to talk about coming up, most of them are going to be, yeah, they need a few more guys here. Or they need 4 more players here. With quarterback, they're actually in pretty good shape, which is pretty unique for where this team is typically at with the quarterback depth. Let's talk running backs and fullbacks. Currently, the Bills have 6 players on the roster: James Cook, Ty Johnson, Ray Davis, Frank Gore Jr., Darrington Evans, and Reggie Gilliam. Over the last 2 years, in 2023 and 2024, the Bills have had 6 running backs / fullbacks on the roster for their 90-man roster. This could be the group. There's a good chance that there's not an addition made at running back. And certainly if the James Cook saga gets dicey, you can see that changing. But there's a decent chance that the players the Bills go to camp with are the ones currently on the roster. So short of there being a concern about Cook's future, I'm not expecting the Bills to make a move here at running back. That is not the case at tight end, where the Bills currently have 4 tight ends on the 90-man roster: Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, Zach Davidson, and Armani Rogers. And keep in mind with Rogers, the guy blew out his Achilles a few weeks ago. He's not going to be available this season. So you really have 3. The average, or the last 2 years, the Bills for the 90-man roster had 5 tight ends. And Quentin Morris has kind of been a player that we have enjoyed as the tight end 3. Well, he's not under contract. In fact, he visited the Detroit Lions recently for a free agent visit. I think there's a lot of potential that Quentin Morris could go play somewhere else next season. And so that leaves you with Kincaid, Knox, and Zach Davidson. And I know that Zach Davidson's a fan favorite, and he certainly brings a lot of juice and energy, and you kind of can feel him at training camp. But at the end of the day, the guy's entering his 5th NFL season and has not proven a thing. It's pretty unlikely that it's going to happen there. And so this is definitely a position where I can see 2 additions coming, and including one that will make this roster. And so sneaky little need here for the Bills. In fact, I did a 7-round mock draft for the Herd Mentality Substack. I posted it on Tuesday afternoon, and I had the Bills drafting a tight end in the 4th round. So definitely we got to start thinking about a mid-round pick at tight end, not only because you need a tight end 3, but also, if you can get a guy that can really play in line, you can kind of have a succession plan for Dawson Knox, if his time in Buffalo is ending in the next few years. So I definitely, and that's another position where the Bills could probably bring back Quentin Morris for 1 year, $2.5–3 million. But that's also a spot where I was talking about earlier where, those types of spots, your linebacker 6, your wide receiver 5, your tight end 3, that's not a spot where you really want to have a bunch of funds tied up. And so having a cost control rookie for the next 4 years would mean a lot for this Bills team. And so I do think we need to be thinking about a tight end investment coming to round out the room. All right, let's move along to the wide receiver position where the Bills currently have 8 receivers on the roster: Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, Joshua Palmer, Curtis Samuel, Tyrell Shavers, KJ Hamler, Jalen Virgil, and Laviska Shenault. Each of the last 2 seasons on the 90-man roster, the Bills carried 13 receivers. They're currently at 8. Now, they'll probably only roster 5, maybe 6. But the Bills have typically kept 2 or 3 on the practice squad, and that's a very popular place where they like to elevate players, come in and maybe have some special teams impact. And so bottom line here at receiver, they have 8. They typically have 13. Guess what? They're coming, right? The Bills will probably pick 1 receiver at least. I think you'll see a couple of undrafted free agents added at receiver, and maybe even another veteran like a Laviska Shenault type player. And so definitely have receiver on your radar for where, some bodies are going to be coming into the mix. And then lastly on offense is the offensive line, where the Bills currently have 12 on the roster: Deion Dawkins, Spencer Brown, Connor McGovern, Osiris Torrance, David Edwards, Alec Anderson, Tylen Grable, Ryan Vandemark, Cedric Van Pran-Granger, Richard Garage, Mike Edwards, and Travis Clayton. That's the 12. Each of the last 2 years, they've had 17. Now, that does include last year where Travis Clayton was exempt, right? Because he's part of the International Pathway Program. So you might be able to look at 16 or 17, but the bottom line, the Bills are at 12. So you're going to need 4 or 5 of these to get to the numbers that the Bills are typically comfortable. And so I think it's going to be tough for an offensive lineman to make this roster. In fact, I didn't even mention Kendrick Green. Kendrick Green should be part of that mix. So that would be 13 currently on the roster. So still room for 3 or 4 to be added to the mix. So I'd expect, potentially a late round pick, UDFA, maybe even a veteran addition like a Kendrick Green to balance this thing out. So that would be another spot where, you start to think about these late round picks. The Bills have a couple of 4ths, a couple of 5ths, a couple of 6ths. You could see you want to get guys that help you balance out your roster and get your numbers where you want them to be. You could definitely see offensive line. All right, coming up on the other side of it, we'll talk defense, special teams, and then really kind of bring this all together. Folks, be sure to stick with me.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
All right, folks, let's continue this conversation on the defensive side of the football. At defensive tackle, the Bills currently have 6: Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, Dwayne Carter, Larry Ogunjobi, Zion Logue, and Branson Dean. Last year, they had 8, 9 in 2023. So you want to get these numbers up, obviously, and you have the Ogunjobi suspension to navigate. So you need a player here, at least one player that's going to be your 4th guy. For the first 6 weeks of the season, no Ogunjobi. So it's Oliver, Jones, and Carter. You need a guy that's going to come in and play 30% of snaps. So maybe that's a veteran. Maybe it's a veteran and an early round draft pick, but there's definitely going to be a meaningful addition added at defensive tackle. I think they should. If the Bills keep all 3 of their picks, they have, in the first 2 rounds, they have 30, 56, and 60. One of those should be on a defensive tackle that you feel good about coming in and playing. And like I talked about several times now, the only ones signed beyond this season are Ed Oliver and Dwayne Carter. And your big expiring contracts would be Jones and Ogunjobi, who are north of 30 players, right? 30, they're on the wrong side of 30. You need to get a cost control player in here that's going to be part of your mix. At defensive end, the Bills currently have 5 of those: Greg Rousseau, Joey Bosa, AJ Epinesa, Javon Solomon, and Michael Hoyt. Last year, they had 10 on the 90-man roster. In 2023, they had 9. So you got room for 4 or 5 of these. So very similar to the defensive tackle conversation. I think you can expect an early pick and a player that is going to potentially have a role here with Michael Hoyt suspended for 6 games, but also, you got some big expiring contracts here in Bosa and Epinesa. And so you're going to want to have another cost control player that is meaningful. So I think you can expect an early pick at defensive end. At linebacker, you have 6 of those: Terrell Bernard, Matt Milano, Dorian Williams, Joe Andreessen, Edifwan Ulofoshio, and Balin Spector. The Bills had 9 on their 90-man roster last year, 8 in 2023. So I think this is a sneaky need as well, where, like I said earlier in the opening segment, you love to get a guy in here that can bump off Balin Spector and be part of that mix as you look to the future, which you kind of told us that you were when you took, you voided the contract of Matt Milano after this season. So I think you want to get a player on here that has some upside. And I think you'll see a day 3 pick and a UDFA and maybe even a veteran. I think when I look at this Bills linebacker depth, I like Dorian Williams quite a bit, but these are all very young players, right? I mean, when you look at it like this, like technically Matt Milano is the only Bills linebacker that's not on a rookie contract. Maybe this is a spot where you might want to bring in a veteran, and the Bills have done that. Like last year was Deion Jones and Nicholas Moreau. Like I can certainly see the Bills wanting to get another veteran in the mix. Not a high impact player, but a guy that's got some years under their belt to come in and add another veteran to the room. At corner, the Bills have 7 of those. Taron Johnson, Christian Benford, Jamarcus Ingram, Dane Jackson, Daquan Hardy, and Corey Couch. Each of the last 2 years, they had 9 corners. And I guess Brandon Codrington would count as well. So that'd be 8. The Bills can definitely get better here. I think that's the thing about this position group. While the numbers are kind of close, you're really lacking your outside corners because 3 of those players are really inside guys in Taron Johnson, Daquan Hardy, and Corey Couch. I know Hardy played a little bit outside in camp in preseason, but in all reality, he doesn't have the measurables to really do that if he ever had to in a meaningful capacity in an NFL game. So your numbers are really thin on the outside. And obviously, this is the most upgradable position on the team, in my opinion. So I think all the writing is on the wall for there to be a top 2 round pick at corner that is given a real opportunity to start for this defense. At safety, the Bills currently have 5 of those. Taylor Rapp, Cole Bishop, Damar Hamlin, Cam Lewis, and Derek Forrest. Last year, they carried 7. They went into camp with 7. In 2023, they went into camp with 8. So you got a little room here to add. Maybe a UDFA, maybe a draft pick. But I think the Bills are pretty close at safety. I'd be surprised if the rostered safeties aren't some combination of the 5 that are already in the mix. Literally, I would not be surprised if the Bills roster 5 safeties and their names are Taylor Rapp, Cole Bishop, Damar Hamlin, Cam Lewis, and Derek Forrest. Then there's special teams, where the Bills have their 3, Tyler Bass, Jake Camarda, the punter, Reed Ferguson. They have carried an extra punter. They get cut at some point, but Sam Martin did have competition last year in Browning. And Jake Camarda, as a player that has a ton of upside, right? A 4th round pick 3 years ago, 2 years as the Bucs punter and did a decent job, gets cut last year. He needs legitimate competition. So you're going to want to add a punter in the draft or as an undrafted free agent that can come in and present some competition for Jake Camarda. So I would see a punter addition at some point. So to tie it all together, the Bills have 66 players on the roster. They can get to 90. So 24 additions are coming. And where I think those additions are coming, and this will equal 24, I think they're going to add 4 receivers. I think they're going to add 2 tight ends, 3 offensive linemen, 3 defensive tackles, 4 defensive ends, 3 linebackers, 2 corners, 2 safeties, and 1 punter. And so calibrate accordingly. When you start to, you're doing 7-round mock drafts, or you're really trying to think about how this roster is going to fill out, I think being aware of what the norms are and where it's lean will take you to the answer of where the investments are coming. Now, those numbers can fluctuate a little bit. I can see the Bills adding a running back, right? And with some of that uncertainty, and maybe that means they only add 3 receivers, or maybe they want to add more corners and you take away 1 from another position group. So there's definitely some opportunities to finesse that. And look, things change fast in the NFL. I mean, look at what happened with Matt Milano literally this week. You get injuries, and all of a sudden a depth that looks really good is now starting, and now the depth's not as good. So you look at it one way, but you never know when you're going to wake up and find that some player blew out their Achilles, right? I mean, this stuff just happens. So that's kind of where it's at right now, but hopefully you found this to be useful in really considering where the Bills will use their draft picks, where the UDFA priorities will be, and any veterans that they want to fill in the blanks with. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.